This is On the Overlap, the platform dedicated to celebrating everything and anything that Scottish women's football has to offer. Hello and welcome back to another podcast from us here at On the Overlap, the platform dedicated to celebrating and promoting anything and everything to do with Scottish women's football. My name is Jack Donnelly and I'm absolutely delighted to have the first of a series of interviews on this show. Today I'm joined by the founder of Leading the Line, the assistant producer at A View from the Terrace and Studio Something, Chris Marshall. Chris, how are you getting on?
I'm very good, mate. How are you yourself? I know we've done this already, but I always like to ask again anyway.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I'm doing all right. Very busy with university and everything like that, but the end's in sight, thankfully, so we can get on and we can have a good Christmas period, COVID permitting, of course, with the whole news breaking over the last couple of days. It's been an absolute nonsense, but should be all right. Fingers crossed, absolutely. As with anyone that I speak to on this show, Chris, I just want to start with a fairly basic question about women's football in Scotland. Why should people invest in it, and why should people care about women's football in Scotland, essentially? What makes it such an attractive product for someone to get involved in?
I think simplistically is the only way is up with it. You just have to look at the way it's turned into a growth industry across Europe over the last couple of years. And I think Scotland is starting to slowly tap into that, but it definitely could dial itself up a couple of notches. So if you're asking me to kind of headline it, I think it's if you always say buy low and sell high.
Yep.
That's women's football is at the stage just now where you can still buy low, and the potential is off the charts just now as well.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. So I suppose we'll just start this chat with yourself before we get into the stuff on women's football. Talk to me about your early days. I mean, when you first developed this love for football, because you're a football writer, you're a freelancer, you've written for a number of publications. So where did that affair with football first begin for you?
I'm probably like most people. Certainly most young boys, because I'm conscious of talking about women's football as well. But through my dad. And then through hierarchies of families, through his dad as well. So my first memories of going to games is going to Julian's Field, which is where Pollock juniors, now not juniors if we want to get into that pyramid chat play. Going there every Saturday. Used to be a case of go up and visit my gran and my grandpa. She'd give me £1 to buy some sweets, and then we'd go down to Newlands Field, and that was kind of how I spent my Saturdays, me, my dad and my grandpa. And that was kind of it. And it's kind of gone on from there. There was a bit of a barren spell where I was working on Saturdays throughout uni, where I felt I felt like something was missing. And when that came back, it was great to have football back in my life. But yeah, it's always been something that's been part of my life, part of my release, part of the thing that keeps me on my equilibrium. One of the things I always remember is when I was a student in primary school, P3 maybe, P4, I'm not entirely sure. But I used to just sit and do make up tables. And I did one for the Highlands and Islands. So the Western Isles had its own wee league, and it had like Stornoway Athletic, and they had like a 30,000 seat stadium. Now I've been up to Stornoway to watch football. I know how ridiculous that is now, but at the time it was fantastic. Like you just sit there and you just battle it out, and you do like 3-4 seasons at a time, and that's how you maybe spent a couple of hours. And then I'm a bit older than you, Jack, so I remember Sevilla the first time round, and yeah, video games and stuff like that as well. So football's always very much been part of my life for sure.
I know you're saying football's always been a part of your life, but could you say the same for women's football? I mean, did any kind of representation of women's football at all when you were growing up, or is that something that you were made more aware of in later life?
Yeah, obviously with hindsight, you look back on it and you go, no, I didn't know anything about women's football. I think my kind of first knowledge was maybe around about it's kind of 2010 time. At that point, Scotland, I mean, maybe I would have been kind of coming into my mid-20s at that point. Scotland started to kind of getting close to getting to tournaments. Yeah. And then the SFA started including women's games on their memberships for the Scotland Supporters Club. So me and my dad would go down and we would go to see the Scotland women's national team play at Tynecastle and Perth and McDermott Park and Fir Park and stuff like that as well. And that's kind of where it started. And then from there, I started going to the SWP. Well, it wasn't SWPL at the time; it was just Scottish Women's Premier League, but not SWPL branded at the time. Games on a Sunday, and I mean, to be honest with you, I am a bit of an old soul when it comes to football. I bemoan the price of football today, and it was a way of seeing football a pretty good value. And I've always been a believer that with football, yes, it's brilliant to go and watch Messi, and I have spent that money to go and watch Messi play for Barcelona and Madrid and stuff like that, and it's a great experience. But I'm also a believer that football, once you boil it down, it's about how competitive the game is, and that competitiveness can be between two of the worst teams in the world, or two of the best teams in the world, or two teams in the middle. And I always think that's something that sometimes gets lost in modern football discourse.
No, it definitely does. I completely agree. I mean, just thinking of some of these massive corporate stadiums, and I think it was Bielsa was saying today that things just seem to be going down a more corporate route. So there's a lot of truth in what you're saying about football being about the competitive edge, no matter the quality. But moving back to yourself, Chris, I mean, working in football media just now and the work that you've been doing with the guys at the Terrace and the stuff that you're doing with Leading the Line, was that always the plan growing up when you started getting this love for football? Was that just, I want to work in football in some capacity one day, or was it just something that kind of happened, a bit of a happy accident, I suppose?
I think I'm a lesson in, sometimes you take yourself down the wrong path, and it's never too late to turn back from that path. Okay. I always loved football, and I never really thought about it as a career, to be honest with you. I never really thought about how I would make being somebody who likes going to football into a thing. And then I kind of finished school. At school, I went to uni, did a degree in communications, which was a bit of a fluff degree. I'm going to hold my hands up and say that. Did a little bit of writing. I did some stuff for Pine Bovril for a wee while and did a couple of things, but nothing really took hold. And then I got too used to money. I liked having money. I ended up working in retail for quite a long time and being relatively good at that, and ended up in banking and being relatively good at that as well. Kind of went away and got a second degree in radio journalism, which was, I think, it certainly helped once I've got to this point in my life. But yeah, I got a little bit sidetracked by some of the things that I think everybody gets sidetracked in, with like just getting used to having things that are important. And it's probably the last couple of years where I set up Leading the Line is probably the start point of everything as to where I am now. Where I kind of managed to take a step back and refocus a little bit.
I mean, was there always a presence of that though? Because I know you went and did some work as you were contributing to the programme at Albion Rovers. You were doing some features editing for Reunion at Cali. I know there was kind of an inherent interest in writing and stuff throughout everything that you've done. So was it always kind of all roads leading to this point?
Retrospect, maybe. Do you know what? Maybe it was. I don't think I thought like that at the time. You mentioned obviously the Albion Rovers stuff, so that actually takes us a step back before Leading the Line, because this is probably actually the thing that set me on the path, which is the notoriety that was Meatful Pastries, which was my pie reviewing website, where I would go to Scott. Unfortunately, I haven't renewed the domain name recently because I haven't been done anything on it for ages, so it's kind of sitting dormant just now. But I'd literally go around Scottish football grounds and review the pie, do a bit of a blog about it. It led to some mad things, like ending up on regional television, sitting on a couch talking to Des Clark? No, Romeo from Clyde One and former Miss Scotland, talking about pies, and then being a judge at the Scottish Pie Championship. So I think that was kind of maybe the point where I was like, I quite like doing this, but I don't really know what to do with it. And then, as I said, I actually lived away for a wee while. I moved to Spain for a few months, and when I came back from Spain, I was a little bit sad I couldn't stay, and I very much got into a rut in terms of the rut that I'd kind of broken free from. So when I came back, the rut was there, and I knew I had to try and kick out of it, and that's kind of where I started to push myself to try and find a way of making something out of it.
Now, I did want to touch on the pie side of things at one point, Chris, to be fair, because I remember when we first kind of got into contact, they proudly proclaimed that you were a pie hopper in your Twitter bio. Could you explain what a pie hopper is for someone that might otherwise have no clue?
I mean, a pie hopper is a ground hopper with food. So essentially, it would be going to a game of football, have a pie, review the pie, and that would essentially be it. It was a way of just kind of creating a bit of point of difference. I mean, one thing, lots of people do that now in terms of like that food kind of thing, but and it's one of the reasons why I don't really need to any longer because so many other people are doing it. But yeah, it was just a bit of a point of difference. It actually started as a bet. So me and one of my mates were sitting in my flat. I think it must have been around pre-season time. I think I'd said he'd been to a couple of games of football that week. And he said, "How many like pies do you think you eat in a season?" I went, "Mate, I don't know, man. Just probably a lot. I have pretty much at least one every time I go somewhere." Mm-hmm. So he was like, "I bet you can't eat 50 in a season," and I was like, "Deal." So that's where it started. That was kind of the origin story of where I am now in terms of I just then started going around the games of football reviewing pies, and I thought, well, if I'm going to eat the pie, I might as well make something out of it, and that's kind of how I always look at things. If there's a way that I can make something out of something, I'll try it. I might not always stick at it, I might not work, or I might think there's a better way of doing it, or something might distract me that's better or more akin to what I'm looking to do. But I always think if it's like you're doing something a bit offbeat, see if there's a way you can make something out of it.
Absolutely. And just obviously with the pie hopping, you're ground hopping as well, and you mentioned you spent some time in Spain, and obviously with that you'd have spent some time in the Spanish lower divisions as well watching football. So in your travels, I suppose, what's kind of been the best thing you've seen at a random ground, wherever it would be in Scotland and Spain, whatever, and what's been the most mental thing that you've seen at a lower league match?
Do you know, one of the things I always appreciate at a lower league match is, particularly in Spain, and I've written about this for someone before as well, is the fact that it's a Sunday morning, and a Sunday morning with a cold beer in hand at 10:30 in the morning, you're usually hangover, like the night before, still running through your head. You get a bocadillo de lomo and queso, the pork and cheese sandwich. Sounds basically anything, but it just like brings you new life. And then I'm a big believer, like everywhere's got a point of uniqueness. It's one of the things I look for when I research stuff for the show. Everybody has something unique about it, whether it's a person or a stadium or a club. So I think anywhere I go, there's always something. I mean, I remember turning up at a Gothenburg against Elfsborg game, not really expecting much, and it was wild. There was tifos, there was smoke. I mean, I was ill as anything that weekend, and it was like the middle of October, so the weather was rubbish. But see, just being in that stand, seeing all that go off, it just gave me new life the rest of that weekend. So I always think there's always something there. I think that's always something to say.
Fantastic. And let's move on to what you're doing just now, because obviously we mentioned you're assistant producer at A View from the Terrace. You started as a researcher before you got into that position. So how did that come about, having been working in banking for so long, that you ended up making that switch over to production media side of things?
Leap of faith, man. It was a leap of faith. So I think by this point, by the time that the View from the Terrace opportunity came out, so I started with the View from the Terrace, started 2020. Right. And when that opportunity came around, I think Leading the Line had maybe been about 6 months old by that point, and I'd already had a couple of like freelance things picked up in terms of writing, and just the Meatfield Pastries thing had a life of its own by that point as well. So it was a bit of a leap of faith. I saw that Craig Fowler, who's obviously one of the guys in the show, had retweeted that Studio Something, who's the company that make A View from the Terrace, were looking for a researcher, and I thought, I could do that. I mean, I might not know anything about TV, but I know about football. I like to think I know what a decent story is. So yeah, leap of faith. It's funny actually. So when I applied for it, you have to kind of like you do a CV, and then you also got to pitch a couple of ideas. And I pitched I think you only meant to pitch one. I think I pitched like 5 or 6. I got carried away. I thought, you know what, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this properly. And then as I think when they asked me to come in for an interview, I was like in Spain because I had delayed going on holiday, so I could go to the Scottish Women's Cup final at Tynecastle between Glasgow City and Hibs. Yeah. So I ended up recording a podcast in Spain, and then when I came back, I had the interview, and then they were like, "Yeah, we want you to come and start." And it was only a 3-month contract, so going from like a decade in banking, pretty secure, pretty decent money, to that was a bit of a leap of faith. But when they kind of gave me the offer, it was like a no-brainer in terms of taking it.
No, absolutely. And you've kind of progressed from that point on to assistant producer now. So how do the responsibilities differ from just being a researcher and now you're kind of helping it produce the show completely?
There's more paperwork. I think that's part of it. No, I mean, I think, so for me, it's very much been about an evolution. I mean, the mad thing about it is when I started, it was before the world that we live in happened. And should do something kept faith with me. They kept me on during that time, and when we came out the other side, it was a little bit of like starting again. But yeah, I mean, the difference between producing and research is not huge. It's very complex.
Right.
And a view from the Terrace world, still researching is very much the main part of my gig. But what producing does is it pulls all the strands together, and it's like going out on shoots and like making sure that the director gets what they need, and the cameraman and the soundie doesn't upset anybody and all that. And then once it comes back together, it's getting all the interviews put together, and then there's other aspects to that. So edit producing is helping put the story together once the director's already kind of given it a pass. So yeah, you kind of have a little bit of touch point in everything. I'm involved in the studio and the VTs that everybody talks about. So I have a little bit of a finger in every pie, a little bit just now, which makes for a varied work life.
What's been your favourite VT that you've produced out the lot? Because as you say, they do get a fair bit of recognition.
I always like to speak in the collective when it comes to the VTs. So for all of us, I mean, of the ones that I'll say for the ones out of this block, I don't know where it's going out, but our last episode, we've got to put a shift in, which I think is one of the best ones we've ever done in terms of put a shift in. I love the homes. I just think there's something that resonates with everybody with the homes, whether it's Somerset Park, Netherdale. I mean, the Netherdale one did really well. And, you know, I always take a little bit of pride whenever we do a story based around women's football. So, I mean, the piece we did with Kayla McDonald-Engwa is one of my favourites. That one, I think that was the first one I really felt like it was not all me, but got the story, sold the story, and then helped the people tell the story. And I was just there as a point man. So yeah, but it's hard not to fall in love with all of them. When you put as much of yourself in it as we all do when we're making this, and this is not just me, but it's the other producers, the directors, the people who have to make sure we don't do anything that gets them into trouble. It's hard not to have a little bit of piece of them in all of them, for sure.
No, and you keep talking about the collective. I take it it's just a really, really good team to be a part of.
It's class. So I mean, I think one thing people always ask is why don't you do it all the way through the season? And with the nicest film in the world, we would all keel over. There is, in terms of the core team, there only is 7 of us, and then there's a studio team, and then there's also the talent as well. But kind of day in, day out, there's 6-7 of us that try and make things tick over. And yeah, it's a great place to work. As I said, it was a no-brainer when I saw the opportunity. It was a no-brainer when they gave me it, and it's been a no-brainer so far as well.
Fantastic stuff. So we'll switch things over to potentially what people know you most for, and the crux of what On the Overlap is trying to tell stories about is women's football. So talk to me about the kind of conception behind Leading the Line. I mean, obviously kind of established back in 2019, Scotland appearing at their first ever World Cup in 2019. Did that kind of go hand in hand for the website's the platform's creation?
Yeah, but I don't think it was by design.
Right.
So I always when I was talking about it earlier on, like my early memories of going to football, and I think the first one that really sticks out in my memory was Scotland played Israel in a World Cup qualifier, and
every year.
And I think it was a World Cup qualifier, a Euro qualifier for Euro 2013 at Tynecastle, and Scotland won 8-9-0. But it was a mad game. It was like a Saturday, like at 5 o'clock. So it was like a kind of game you could go to after going to another game. And at that time, the protests about Israel were, I think, at one of the louder points. And the game was as much a sideshow for kind of Palestine protests as it was the football in the park. And it's a game I always reference because it's probably where I would say that I can pinpoint that's the point where I go, like, this needs more attention. And for a long time, I was just a fan. I would just go to games I would go to the Scotland games, I would go to SWPL games, I would just go as a punter. I would just go along and enjoy it. I mean, I remember going to a Scottish Cup game between Ayr United and Blackburn, and it finished 10-9. It was like 6-6 at full time, 8-8 at half time of extra time. It was mad. It was one of the maddest games. I always talk about it. I would love to try and figure out a way of doing something about it, but women's football, as we both know, it's not super well covered even now to get that kind of information. But yeah, I think I started to get a bit of a frustration that people weren't talking about it. That there wasn't noise, particularly from, if I'm being honest, particularly from clubs who had women's teams that maybe weren't doing enough to champion their cause. I mean, we live in a world now where Rangers and Celtic put a bit of money in their sides, but for a long time, Rangers and Celtic were mid-table fodder in the women's game. So yeah, it kind of started like that, and I think my involvement properly started. I just, as I said, sometimes I'll just do stuff and then I'll hang the consequences, whatever they'll be afterwards. I just started like firing out graphics, just like preview graphics for like the games at the weekend. And SWF got in touch and said, like, do you want to come on board and kind of help us out a little bit? I said, yeah, sure. I mean, it's voluntary, as is most things in women's football just now. So I was like, sure, no problem. But even then, I felt like I was just kind of, I don't cover women's football to cover women's football. I do it to try and raise a profile. I think that's how I always view it. So I can do a match report. It's not my favourite thing to do, but I can do one if it's needed. So yeah, I think probably when the World Cup came around and I saw all the interest behind it, I thought, do you know what, this is a momentum Caesar. And then having Campbell, who I'd never met until I started doing the women's football stuff, and he was similar position to yourself. He's a couple of years older than yourself, but he was in that position where he was kind of available to kind of come along for the ride, and that's kind of where it started. And yeah, it's been it was a bit of a slow burn to start, but yeah, I think as evidenced by this conversation, people do notice it, which is nice.
So that was the idea by starting, and I know you said you didn't start covering women's football to cover it. So was that the idea that you would be there as almost a placeholder before it became more widely covered by the kind of mainstream outlets?
Joe, Jack, that is exactly it. That's exactly where I had it in my head. In my head, I was like, I'll do this for a while. Maybe there'll be something I get out of it that I want to properly enjoy, do behind the scenes or something else that I get to still give back, but I don't have to be. Leading the line doesn't have to exist. I think I've said that a few times to folk actually. In an ideal world, leading the line doesn't exist because there's enough coverage out there already. So yeah, I think you've nailed it on the head. That's certainly always been one of my thoughts, and especially as I get older and I value my free time a little bit more. I always want to make sure that what I'm doing is having the right impact. It doesn't become noise. And I think as soon as things starts just becomes noise, I think that's when they lose impact. And that's why sometimes now maybe stuff doesn't come out as regularly from leading the line because it is just noise. But if it's something a bit more concerted, then that's got a broader impact. And I think that's the big thing for me. It's always been grow the game. At the end of the day, nobody really wants to hear me talk about whether a goal was offside or not. That's not. I talk about it, and I'll get the odd thing in my ear about it because if you talk about it, that's part of the game. But yeah, for me, I think by now most people know that my shtick is raising the profile and try to push it along a little bit.
And was it always a plan to do it alongside somebody? I know you brought Campbell in, or did you ever kind of consider going it alone for a while, or was it just always a case of I want to do this, but I want to do it with someone, so it's not just one person going at it for however long every week?
I am incredibly grateful to Campbell, and he hates it when I tell him this because I'm very grateful to him because when Leading the Line started actually as an initial run of like 6 interviews, and it was interviews with people with interesting takes on the world of football, and I always tried to skew it with a women's football angle. So I spoke to Karen Dobrez, who's one of the kind of the team behind Lewis, who are obviously very well known for their Quality FC movement. I spoke to somebody at Canifa, and obviously the advancement of the women's game there as well. And it's always something I've always enjoyed, is speaking to people and getting their opinions about what can be better, what can be worse. And then I think when I realised that I was kind of going down a path of analysis, I would need somebody else. I think I've said to Cam a few times, well, we probably could do with even more people, if I'm being honest. But I'm also aware that I don't want to grow something to a point where it's becomes. I can't quite put my finger on it, but having Campbell's brilliant, because Campbell, he knows as much as any man does about the women's game. We've got a nice split as well. I think we both kind of appreciate, we both have slightly different viewpoints on things sometimes, and we have maybe come at it different angles, and I think that works for us, because I can talk him off the ledge and he can talk me off the ledge, and vice versa when it comes to opinions sometimes. So it's great having Campbell, and he goes out there every Sunday, and I know sometimes I'm aware that sometimes it feels like I just watter on about it all the time, but sometimes that's what you need to do, and he does it too as well. But he's maybe a bit more restrained in it than I am.
That's not necessarily a bad thing, though. I suppose it's good to have the kind of opposing viewpoints, because that's just what's going to make a good listen to a podcast or something like that. Just it would almost be bad just having two guys agreeing on absolutely everything for however long, half an hour, what would it be? So it works well having the kind of two sides to the coin, you could say. Having run it for, that'll be about a year and a half, 2 years coming up. So what do you think's been your favourite moment, or your kind of most prideful moment having leading the line?
I mean, there was a spell. I think for me, one of the things was during the lockdown period, it really got into like an interview kind of and in terms of interviews, it was just reaching out to players from the rest of the PL clubs, players from the national team, some other folk of completely different types, and just kind of getting to know a bit more about. So I think for me, with leading the line, it's always been a case of every time we get another one out, it's a bit of a success. Especially now, it feels that way. I mean, that's 130 we've done now, which when I think about the approach to editing I take now compared with beforehand, where I just used to fling out, and now I'm a little bit more cautious about what we actually broadcast. Definitely there, but for me, I think Scotland. I think any kind of Scotland related content, because I think that is a gateway for a lot of people. I think the World Cup showed that. So if I can help, I mean, before the Scotland-Faroe Islands game at Hampden, if you want to talk about Hail Marys, I sent an email to the Faroese FA saying, can I speak to your captain? And 2 days later, I was speaking to her down the phone, and we had the podcast out of it. So, I think for me, anything that shines a light, I don't really think there's going to be a point where there's going to be something that I'm going to hang my... Naturally, I always think that something can be better. That's who I am. That's kind of how I always approach things as well. But I think as long as it keeps moving in the right direction and people understand that's what we're trying to do, then that's good enough for me.
Fantastic. And I suppose talking of things moving in the right direction, the coverage of women's football in Scotland has improved since the World Cup. I always use that as a kind of starting point. That was the real driving catalyst behind just upped coverage. I mean, we got, what was it, a game streamed every weekend, and then Alba picked up a game towards the end of last season. The highlights show came out, and it's almost been just a long time coming for it. It's, from your view, having been invested for the best part of a decade now, is it just very gratifying to see the kind of biggest broadcasters in the country finally giving women's football in Scotland its due and giving it airtime and attention?
I mean, I will go to bat for BBC Alba all the time. I think BBC Alba, they get lost behind a lot of the noise about it's in Gaelic. That's the one thing everybody always says, but BBC Alba have been like there for women's football pretty much consistently now. Even the other weekend I was working the SWFL finals, and they were there filming a VT for half-time of the Scotland game. That was grassroots football. They didn't have to go and do that. They could have left it and had something else up there that maybe wasn't as important to know in the game, but they did that. So yeah, it is, and I think the fact there's a highlights show just now, brilliant. Like it gets more eyes on it. It does mean that the information on the highlight show has to be accurate, and the coverage has to be of a quality that you would expect everywhere else. And I think that is a work in progress still at the moment. But yeah, it's great to see. And I've always said as well that one of the things for me is when it comes to, and I think it's maybe something I've certainly felt in the last kind of 6-12 months, is when it comes to growing the women's game, leading the line is great. I could throw everything at leading the line, but actually, if I can get a little bit of women's content into a different platform or somewhere that maybe it wouldn't be there if I hadn't put it forward, then that's a big win for me. I think it's one of my I think if anybody watches the View from the Terrace may have noticed that there's been an increased push towards women's football, and the guys absolutely take it on board and they go for it and they will give it the best. But yeah, for me, it's always about seeing how far can we push it, how high could you get this coverage? Why isn't the highlight show? I mean, the highlight show is actually in a really good spot. That's not a bad example. But why are the streaming games not live? Why are they behind the red button? Like that'd be my next push. Is like, well, let's get them on there, and then you look at the people that are covering it. You go, let's get some of the experts in. I mean, even now, I mean, that there's good coverage, but there's also still coverage that could be better. I mean, the Scotland Ukraine game on Friday night at Hampden, we finished one each. In the post-match press conference, it was the same faces, and I think it probably will probably trip into this. I'm guessing, but I think the big thing now for women's football is how do we convert this renewed interest, these more eyes, into bums on seats and make it up, and to use a very marketing term, and I'm sorry about this, but I'm going to say it, to make the product more attractive, not just to sponsors, which have obviously come back on board recently, but to fans, and to make people turn up at games, because I think if we're honest, the crowds are still very poor. There is the exceptions every now and again, but yeah, I think that is definitely the next phase for women's football in Scotland.
No, I think talking about the next phase is going to be quite interesting, because you're right in saying we've just kind of gotten a title sponsor back for the top two divisions, the SWPL 1 and 2 in Parts Motor Group, and how important do you think that is just for kind of pushing that now and making the product more attractive, as you're saying, and having just a name, I suppose, associated with the divisions and being able to have that in place?
Yeah, I mean, it's about perception. You saw it with the men's game, and they didn't have a sponsor for long enough, and that started to trickle into perception of how the game was running. I think that was similar for the women's game. The sponsor coming in is great. It's going to be till the end of this season, and then the dance starts all over again. But yeah, I think that level of investment is important to keep it sustainable, and I think that's a big thing that is still not underplayed, but definitely needs noticed, which is that there's still a fragility to women's football in Scotland. Be soft for Farmington, an SWPL 1 team, have to back out of the league, and they're still continuing as a youth club, and they're still doing very well in that area of the country. But there is still a fragility to women's football in Scotland, and it's not going to go away for a long time, if we're being honest. And I think that's a big thing. And there's pros and cons, obviously, to the influx of money behind Rangers and Celtic, and that it could turn into a bit like the men's game. But at the same time, it is bringing more eyes, more people are watching it, more people are interested, as the local constabulary go by the flat. But yeah, I think it's important. I think you even see with Scotland renewing sponsorship deals and just making people believe. I think that's the thing. And sometimes I get I maybe get accused of being a bit of an evangelist when it comes to women's football. Okay. And I'm okay with that, because there's enough people out there willing to kick out or moan or find fault with it. And do you know what? Yes, I'm not naive to the fact that things could be better. And sometimes I will pipe up and I'll say them. But in the main, I'm here to push a sunny side, because do you know what? Life's so much nicer when you push sunny sides to things as well, to be perfectly honest with you.
No, 100%. I suppose there's still a lot to be done, but I don't know if you saw the comments recently on the kind of media day for the Parks Motor Group announcement. I think Claire Shine and Amy Gallagher were speaking to the media, talking about how they're hoping for complete professionalism within the league. I think Claire Shine said hoping to see kind of professional clubs all the way up and down the top division within 2 years. I think Amy Gallagher said within 5. I mean, when you've still got clubs like Forfar Farmington that are having to pull out the competition altogether, how realistic is it that we can see every club in the top flight turn professional in the next half a decade or so?
I think it's going to be tough. I think the SFA obviously released their kind of strategy for women's girls football, which covered the national team and the domestic game. There's a bit of an overlap as to who deals with what, and there's also a bit of separation with that as well. But the aim, I think, if I remember right, for the 5-year strategy was to have enough players that I think, and I'm doing this off the top of my head, but I did do the sums at the time, but it was around about 80% of the top flight would be professional players. So even then, 5 years down the line, that's not the entirety of the top tier in the women's game. But I do think stuff like the fact we've got relegation this season is huge. Like the last couple of seasons for women's game has been a bit transient. It's seen kind of a lot of games that don't really matter, if I'm being honest. But now we've obviously got a 10-team top tier. Obviously, the second tier was affected by the Forfar Farmington withdrawal, but that's going to be changing, and there's going to be teams coming up to that. I think there are clubs with ambition now underneath. I think if you look in the North Region, Montrose are the one that held up just now because they have run away the league. They lost the Championship Cup final the other weekend, but they run away the league. And then, like in the South, you've got likes of Rossville and Gartcairn, two clubs who have not really had an impact in the men's game in a wider range. But if you look at the way they've approached their non-league sides, they are approaching the women's team the same way. And I think there is a little bit, not a shortcut for sides to take, but I think if you are looking to establish yourself as your name in Scottish football discourse, then do you know what? Maybe it's going to be too difficult for you to get to the top of the SPFL pyramid, the SWPL pyramid. Why not give it a go and see what happens?
Oh, top stuff. We'll move on to the national team just now. You've kind of been at the forefront and kind of covering the new era that we're going into under Pedro Martinez-Losa, of course, replacing Shelley Kerr back in July. What have you kind of made of his appointment? How do you think things have been kind of going under his reign so far?
I was relieved it finally happened. I think that was the first thing. The end of the Shelley Kerr era, I think, will forever have a little tinge of mystery to it. But she obviously was announced as departing on Christmas Eve last year, and then took about 6 months for Pedro Martinez-Losa to come in. And during that time, we had our interim coach, and he did all right. But I think for me, it very much needed something with a bit of imagination, something with a bit of cachet to come in after what was a really disappointing end to qualifying for the Euros. I think that really will be felt next summer when the tournament's on. But yeah, I think Pedro Martinez-Losa was an appointment that got people excited. He has a bit of pedigree, was very successful at Arsenal and Bordeaux. He knows the English game, which is important when you look at obviously the number of Scottish players that are down there in the WSL and the Championship as well. And I think he's made a pretty solid start. He's also had to come in straight into the fire, well, as much of the fire as Hungary and Faroe Islands could be as a starting point. Obviously had his first kind of hiccup against Ukraine on Friday, but speaking to players and people round about the camp, there's definitely a wave of positive momentum behind things at the moment just now. It feels like not just the players and the coaches, but it feels like the organisations behind that a lot more just now as well. I think that they deserve a lot of credit for that just now, because it'd be very easy with the men's team finally, after what feels like genuine decades of supporting them being a bit guff as are now coming into some form. I think it's important that continues as well. So I was pleasantly surprised by his appointment. He's definitely got his way of playing, which I think will bring its highs and lows. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be a magic thing overnight. I think we've been fortunate with the group they've got for the World Cup, and that getting to the playoffs is very achievable. And I think from there, it's about who we get. But yeah, I think so far I'm pretty content. We'll see how it pans out over the rest of the qualifying campaign.
I suppose the first massive test comes tonight against Spain, and was it 12-0, 13-0 they beat the Faroes by the other night, so we know how easily they can stick them in the back of the net. I know it's the Faroes, so we don't maybe want to read into it too much, but they're top of the group by a goal difference of about 30 odd anyway, so they'd already done quite well at that point. So big test for Scotland tonight on the night of recording this. You mentioned the men's team doing well. I mean, this is the first time in my lifetime that I've actually seen the men's team at a tournament and potentially qualifying for another one in succession. So literally never seen it in my life before. Do you think there is something about the kind of positivity surrounding Steve Clarke's men that's going to get bums and seats for women's games as well? Do you think that's kind of translating through in the whole campaign of you've supported the men, the women need your support the week later, make sure you get to Hampden for the Ukraine game, whichever it would be. Do you think that's had any sort of impact so far, or do you think there's still more work that needs to be done?
I don't think there's a direct correlation. What I do think there is a correlation between now is the next generation of football fans, like yourself, Jack, the generation who are open to women's football as a concept. I have mates who still have, like, I talk about women's football and they hit out with all the cliches and I go, I can't be bothered with this conversation, we just move on from it. But I think the thing for women's football just now is it has got that next wave of fans willing to give it a shot, to go and try it, especially Scotland games. I think moving to Hampden is great. Mm-hmm. I was a bit on the fence for a long time about it, and then when it was announced, the more I thought about it, the more it kind of made sense. And then you saw like how people were reacting, the players, you even just see the crowds. I mean, I think for me what was really stark was when we played the Faroe Islands. No, sorry, when we played Hungary, and we went 2-1 at Hampden, and Rachel Corsi scored that late winner. And then we played Sweden, one of the best teams in the world, at St Mirren, like that following midweek. Yeah, the weather wasn't great, but the crowd was poor, very poor. And part of me goes, if that had been played at Hampden, we couldn't do it because of COP things and how that dictated life in Glasgow for a couple of weeks. I think you would have had a much better crowd. So I think the Hampden effect's almost as important as anything else. And also success on field helps a lot in terms of that, in terms of the recognition. But yeah, I think I'm optimistic because it feels like there is a wave coming that are more open to this as a concept as football fans, and I think that's so important too.
Just finally wrapping it up here, Chris, I mean, we've talked about progression in both the domestic game and the international game since we qualified for the World Cup. What should be done now to be able to say that we don't stagnate at all, we don't plateau in this stage of women's football? What needs to be done now to be able to kick on and get even further, get even better? If you can name anything individually or as a collective, whether there's one thing that needs to be done more than most, or whether it's a range of different things that we need to target to be able to progress even further.
I think it's incumbent on women's football in Scotland, whether you cover it, whether you're involved in it, whether you play it, be noisy, like make a noise, because do you know what? Sometimes things won't go to plan, and you know sometimes things will look not that great. But if you're consistent with it and you back yourself and you back what you're doing, you back what you believe in. We both know there is hundreds of people that volunteer more than just a Sunday afternoon to get football played in Scotland, women's football played in Scotland, not just grassroots, not just in the Championship, the SWPL 1, SWPL 2, it's the same thing. And I think people need to be a little less humble about the work that they do for it, because you know what, if they can make more noise, then do you know what, some of the clubs they're affiliated with would have to start paying attention to it. I do think that there is still a very much a tick box exercise when it comes to supporting the women's game in Scotland for some people, in terms of, we've done it once, we've done it really well once, we've really put our energy behind it once, and then the rest of the season it's just not even thought about. So yeah, I think it's on decision makers, it's on editors of newspapers, it's on editors of TV programmes, some people like myself who maybe can have a little bit of an influence in the conversations, and to say, look, this is something we should be talking about. And do you know what? Yeah, sometimes it isn't going to look like a full Ibrox or a full Celtic Park or a full Easter Road or whatever team you want to reference it, but it still matters to people. And I think that's something that needs to be shouted about more. How that happens, who knows? But yeah, I think that's always my thing is, and I can honestly, anytime I speak to anybody, or somebody comes on and does an interview, or somebody shows an interest, I always say to them, like, you don't understand how important like these conversations are to have. So yeah, I think that'd be my thing. Make a noise, like be loud, be noisy, don't hide. Ask the questions, ask the difficult questions. Like, and do you know what? Sometimes I'm reticent. I don't ask difficult questions in public. I don't think it's not my vibe, but it's not really. I don't really have the platform, the forum to make the change on it. But I'll ask them in private. I will ask questions that don't make sense to me. And I think that's the important thing. Is if you have something that you think you can ask about, then go for it.
No, absolutely fantastic, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you for the last wee while or so. Feel free to let everyone know where they can find you online.
If you want to find me online, at Mersters is pretty much everywhere, and then obviously at Leading the Line is the podcast, sometimes article thing, the women's football thing in general, but and you'll usually find me at a game of football somewhere as well. I'm pretty easy to find.
Good stuff. Well, thank you very much to everyone for listening to this episode of the Overlap podcast. Subscribe to the podcast feed so you don't miss a new episode whenever it comes out. Subscribe to the YouTube channel so you get the full video platform as well. The website's coming in the next week or so. We're getting that finally built, so we'll be that out very shortly. But until next time, I've been Jack Donnelly, and don't forget to watch women's football, enjoy women's football, and most importantly, support women's football. We'll see you next time.